So what do we need grids in our designs? Well, using grids, we can actually go ahead and align objects and place them accordingly in a more organized way throughout our artboards. By clicking any artboard, you can go ahead and actually access those grid options in the properties panel on the right side over here. Now we have two types of grids. We have a layout grid and a square grid, and we're going to quickly go through those in this lecture. To use a grid, you can go ahead and click this little checkbox over here, and that will go ahead and create a grid for us. And now this is a column grid that has 12 columns across our artboard with a gutter width of 16 pixels between each column and with a column width of 221 pixels. And this right here is our margin on the sides over here, so the left and the right side. If you set this to 0, it will go ahead and remove that margin and create an evenly spaced out column. We can increase our gutter to, let's say, 50 pixels. And so now there's more spacing between our grids or our grids columns. We can increase or decrease our number of columns and so on and so forth. Now by default in a web type of design, 12 column is pretty typical. So we're going to kind of go back to 12, 16, and 243 and add 200 margin on the sides. So if you are in this option over here, you can actually go ahead and set the left and right margins together, but you can also go ahead and change it to this option if you want custom margins from each side, the top, the right side, the bottom, and the left side. But typically we just do the left and right side like this because we want spacing from the left and right corners. And then we can go ahead and actually align our objects to our grids so that we create kind of a organized layout and we know exactly how much spacing we're using between each object. Now, one neat thing is that while you're working with objects here, it will go ahead and show you that little pink box in between your objects to show you that you have an even spacing between all these three objects here, or I should say groups, which is pretty cool. So again, grids will help us align our objects throughout our design evenly. And as we work on our project, you'll see us use grids every now and then in order to make sure everything's aligned and distributed properly throughout our designs. Now, if the blue color here is a little bit distracting, we can go ahead and click on this little fill and decrease the transparency of the columns so that they're more hidden and they don't kind of interfere with our designs. And at any point, we can go ahead and simply turn it off. And now we see our objects are much more nicely and neatly organized throughout our artboards. The other type of grid is a square grid, and essentially this is kind of like a grid, an evenly square grid all across the design. We can go ahead and change the square size here. We can make it, let's say, 50. And so now you have a different type of grid where it has both the horizontal and vertical lines all across evenly. So you can definitely use a square grid if you want more specific alignment, especially if you're maybe putting together an icon or something that requires more detail in terms of the spacing. But otherwise, we typically use a layout grid when it comes to web and mobile apps. I can always turn it on and off again, as I mentioned, from right over here. If at any point you want to use this grid as a default grid, you can go ahead and make this the default grid. And so this way, if I make some changes, let's say to my grid, and I want to use a custom grid over here, and I want to, let's say now I want to go back to that default grid, I can always click the use default, and I'll go ahead and change back to the settings of my default grid that I've set, which is pretty handy. So that's how you use grids in Adobe XD. In the next lecture, we'll explore how to align and distribute our objects across our artboards.